Hi, Adam. So thanks so much for joining us. So for everyone that's watching, we're talking to Adam Nathaniel Furman. He's a designer and artist and has made some awesome stuff. And we're really looking forward to talking to him today. Maybe just to kick off, can you tell us a bit about your background and how you got into design?
So my background's in architecture. Well, initially it was I went to study foundation course back in 2001 at Central
Mm,
St. Martin's, sort of because I was thinking about I wanted to be an artist,
mm,
and ended up being sort of coming across a fantastic teacher who sort of shuffled me towards architecture, which actually I've always loved architecture. I was one of those weird 9-year-old kids that would sort of go around looking up at buildings and sort of wandering into the road dangerously while looking up at how amazing everything was above me. But I just didn't think I was clever enough, or had the grades.
mm,
But as many of my friends have had at certain points in life, you get picked up by an amazing teacher, and she sort of guided me through well, how to go around UCAS basically, and into architecture school.
mm.
And I ended up going to like a super arty architecture school called the Architectural Association, and studied in kind of crazy studios where we would spend a year, and this is an architecture school, sort of making films, or building sculptures or making furniture. So it was like a really, really interesting, rounded, almost design, craft, art education
Oh,
rather than necessarily architecture, but from a sort of within the kind of context of architectural discussion. And then
mm,
on leaving, I thought I should be an architect, and I worked for many, many years in architecture practices, 8 years. But the whole time was like really interested in design,
mm,
sculpture, installation, writing. And while I was working in the offices during the day, I was always in my lunch break and in the evenings and on weekends, I was kind of doing curatorial projects. I was doing installations. I was making films. I had a film that was shown at the New York Architecture and Design Film Festival. And slowly that sort of side stuff grew and grew and grew to the point
wow,
where I had to sort of make a decision. Do I set up on my own and actually take this stuff really seriously, or do I sort of
mm,
commit to architecture? Because I was sort of rising up within offices at that point,
mm.
and clearly I made the jump. And this was a good 6 years ago now, and it's
Mm,
been incredibly fun since then. So that's the
yeah,
kind of potted short version of the journey.
amazing. And as you know, we're talking about pride for this issue. What's your experience or knowledge of pride growing up, would you say?
Um, so it's interesting. I saw the questions, and I'm wondering, do you mean pride as in the formalized institution, or pride as in the feeling of pride?
The former, so pride with a capital P.
Um, okay, so because that's interesting, because I had taken it as being the latter,
Ah, okay.
which is very meaningful to me, and I think lots of
Mm,
people like me, because with pride with a capital P being something that's sort of somewhat diverged from that over the past kind of couple
mm,
of decades. So I guess a feeling of pride, which was embodied by the parade when I was young,
mm,
was very important, and was part of the context that basically saved my life effectively. And I kind of this is not really exaggerating. I were in high school in the 90s. There was Section 28, which is what sort of created the environment for young gay people who were going through school. And even if your experiences didn't necessarily directly relate to that, it kind of created a sort of deep freeze. And I came out slash was outed in school when I was quite young, in a
right.
boys' school, in a very posh, expensive boys' school,
Mm,
and was very, very badly bullied, abused, and got no support from the school. Not once was it ever mentioned the situation, that it
wow.
was because I was gay, or and in the end I was asked to leave, because I think the final straw was that one of the teachers said they didn't feel comfortable with me in their class, and of course this wasn't questioned or discussed because of the kind of context and environment
Right.
around being gay effectively, or really frankly any different in any way.
Mm,
And obviously that would have been terrible if I was, um, maybe in a small town or somewhere where I didn't have an escape valve. But luckily, being in London, I found a sense of community amongst others. And for
mm,
instance, just going to Camden and Soho, I managed to sort of click into the gay scene,
mm,
and very queer culture, but also, it's not entirely gay. It's sort of just odd subcultures,
mm,
and that was kind of my savior. I found people.
mm,
I did my A levels in a gay pub, I mean, I studied for my A levels in the Cape Up, where they allowed me during the day to drink tea because obviously they didn't want, there's a licensing issue. I shouldn't have been there, but and you know, I sort of going out, made friends, and was taught that what I was not disgusting. You know, I was, and still am to a certain degree. We can get into that a little bit later. The journey has been really not necessarily a totally pleasant one. It was full of shame, you know, self-disgust. I hated myself. There was a lot of self-blaming going on, sort of a lot of confusion, and just being able to be around people who would say, no, don't be ashamed, be proud. And so the very notion, and yes, so Pride was going on, and it was very much about this sort of amazing coalition of people who were pushing back against Section 28, who were pushing forward for, you know, the nail bomb went off in '99. I was down the road from it. I was in Piccadilly Circus and heard it. You know, it was a very tense period, but at the same time it was full of pride, and there was a political context to it, but it was also, I think for me more than anything, it was pushing back against the kind of feeling of social ostracization. And so pride for me is all about the opposite of shame, the opposite of self-disgust, the things that you are forced to internalize by a world or people who tell you that you are wrong and the way you are is wrong. And unfortunately, fortunately, just as the situation is, kind of this is something that very much continued, obviously not in the same physical way, but continued through into my professional career, and you know, has been a problem until very recently.
Wow, even in your previous sort of adult working life as well then?
Yeah, I mean, the practices I worked in were sort of mostly really fantastic. But for instance, I mean, my you know, in a sort of early practice that I worked in, I was sort of I was working with somebody who ended up, you know, punching me really badly in the face in the middle of a working period, because I called them out on this extremely homophobic music that that they were playing, and they were not, you know, they were not reprimanded. They were just simply moved to a different part of the company. And you know, had experiences at university that were you know, sort of verging on violent and frightening, and that sort of wrapped up with the fact that I look like, I guess, a sort of caricature of a gay person. You know, I love bright colors. I'm quite flamboyant, and I do that in my designs as well, which has led to a certain amount of focus, I guess, from people who find an excuse for their dislike being expressed through aesthetic criticism as well. So that's been a kind of extra layer where I guess yeah, it's been a sort of easier way for people to sort of attack as well, within the design community.
Yeah, God, I'm so sorry you've had that experience. That's awful. But I'm so glad you turned it into such a positive outlet now.
Yeah, and you know, at every step of the way there's that, but there's also its opposite. So there's also allies and amazing people. You know, and I mean, otherwise, you know, I wouldn't be here. There's lots and lots of opportunities to do exciting things, and you know, the context has been noticeably getting better. I mean, in the past 20 years, it's phenomenal how much the context and the environment has changed. And the most thrilling thing is seeing young designers, artists, graduates, architects coming through, and they are so full of spunk. They are like, they have like no regrets about expressing themselves. They're confident and they're proud, you know, and it's just so brilliant to see them.
So I guess pride with a capital P and pride with a small p are both super important to you and have been super important to you throughout your life in general.
Yeah, I mean, I think the origins of the Pride Parade, or at least maybe in the middle period of its life when I was younger, are very much tied to the type of pride that I guess I'm sort of discussing in a personal context. You know, and it is also taking, you know, if there's something about you that has been a reason for other people to attack you, but it's integral to your sense of identity, it is a really fantastic thing to be able to take that and turn it into a positive, and turn it into the very thing that you're proud of and makes you special. And that's kind of one of the great powers of the concept of pride. You know, it's angry, it's full of a sense of desire for justice, but it's also taking all those things which you've been taught to think are superficial, stupid, that you should be ashamed of, that are disgusting, that are unnatural, that whatever the thoughts are, and just saying they're brilliant.
Yeah.
This is what makes me different.
Turning it on its head completely.
Yeah.
Yeah. In your work, I know you've used the term queer aesthetics in quotes, and you've mentioned it, sort of touched upon it just now. Can you explain a bit more how you define that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit of an oxymoron in a way, because I guess that when I discuss queer aesthetics, I think some queer people get annoyed because they think that I'm talking about bright, you know, the sort of caricature of sort of the bright colors and the rainbows, which is not what I mean. It's rather the way that the queer community and queer individuals throughout kind of Western history have always been generators of novelty and difference, and have been sort of extremely vital to aesthetic and artistic culture by being outsiders, but outsiders which are which have one foot inside the center. So there's a kind of alterity which is actually quite close to mainstream culture, and that sort of difference is antagonistic, but also refreshes the mainstream. So in a way, it's kind of queer aesthetics, the way I think about it, in any given context, in any particular place or time in that place, are always related to mainstream ideas of good taste, but they're always distorting, changing, transforming it, bringing new things from the outside into it. So there's a kind of yeah, I guess sort of exciting, antagonistic, but mutually reliant relationship between what I think of as queer aesthetics and like mainstream taste. So it's outsiderness, but outside, not so far outside that they're not actually influencing the inside. And actually, some of the, you know, most important and greatest figures in architecture and design and fine art, they have been queer, very often closeted, but they've always been very powerful because of the kind of novelty that they bring, but they've never been entirely accepted. So there's always a kind of suspicion about them. They're sort of powerful, but they're never fully accepted because they're always a bit other. But they're always, I mean, Versace's a really funny example, you know, of his combining of the high and the low, and the past and the present, and the sort of kitsch and the sophisticated, you know, sort of highly respected, but then at the same time kind of ridiculed and kept outside. So yeah, it's not, when I say queer aesthetics, I say an oxymoron because it's not a fixed set of looks, it's not things. It's actually about a relationship with the mainstream at any given point in time.
Fascinating. That makes total sense. I guess looking into your work in more detail, and I've looked on your website and seen a lot of your previous projects, which are amazing. Noticed the fab chairs. Can you explain a bit more about your work in general, and also specifically about those fab chairs, so people can go and have a look at your work?
Yeah, the fab chairs, they're not in production sadly, but it was a sort of really nice research project. I wanted to, so I'm really interested in the idea of cuteness, and it's mixed with, it's sort of three issues, that design questions that I sort of like investigating. It's sort of the question of cuteness, the question of color, and the question of queerness within my practice. So I think the idea of queer aesthetics as a kind of symbiotic, antagonistic relationship is on the sort of broader level, the way I think about it. I mean, I do think about my work that way, but then with me, there's a very specific set of forms and colors, which are my queer aesthetics, okay, in my moment, but they're not, I don't in any way try and say that they're that generally they are queer aesthetics. It's not at all. It's contingent on the moment that I'm in and the way that I work. And so I wanted to, you know, I write a lot. Actually, I'm sort of trying to write a lot less, but then ended up doing a book now as well, another book. But and I lecture and I discuss and I talk, and I do research projects, and I do designs that are kind of really for like museums. I've got some sort of queer pieces which are going to the National Gallery in Victoria now in Melbourne, which are going to be on a show there soon. But I wanted to do something that was extremely succinct, simple, easy to manufacture, affordable, and yet nonetheless embodied a lot of the ideas that I was talking about. So it's kind of a design challenge to myself. And those chairs were the result of that design challenge. It's just set to myself, like I didn't have a client. And so I came up with something that was machine-wise very easy to manufacture, very simple process, were durable, lasting, but had these qualities that were, on the one hand, okay, cute, kawaii. So that's, I think cuteness for me is important because it's quite subversive. It's obviously, it's a way of creating a sense of empathy and connection to the inanimate world, which I think is extremely important and quite lacking. It's a sense of connection. It's the way that it's a kind of connection you would have with a pet. It's by anthropomorphizing objects, we move back to a sort of atavistic, animistic idea of the world where everything has a life to it. And we value things more. And cuteness is this incredibly potent way of doing that, right? You actually, the world becomes alive around you. It's also a really fantastic way of subverting the idea of the sophisticated and the intellectual. It's by making it fun and accessible. And it does that with a lot of categories. The cute just combines, it blurs categories. It really messes up our sense of hierarchy. And then with the queer, it's taking something which is recognizably of the body. So this is, and this is something that I have different threads of work, but in a certain thread of my work, I do love, I'm working on something now in King's Cross that's doing this. I do love referencing the human body in a way that is, again, cute, but, and obviously physical. Okay, so there's you can see the bodily elements in it, but that is ambiguous and not possible to pin down, is ungendered. So you can kind of see different bits, but you're never sure. So I'm always overlapping two genders, so you never quite know which one is being referenced. And non-sexual, and that's a kind of really important part of, from my approach to queerness, is it's a disassociation from the act of sex, which for me is, it's just a personal thing, but for me queerness is kind of about everything else. And then color, this is looking at, again, in relation to kawaii, it's colors which are it's like childhood, childish, minimalist, and together with a shape actually reference. So this is a queering of a tradition. So it's always, for me, in my thought of my approach to it, it's always that you can see in some way a prototype. You can see where something has come from, but it's distorted. And this is actually based on a tradition of architect design chairs using ply the 1960s through to the 1990s or early 2000s. There's chairs by Sana, a Japanese architecture practice, in the 1960s is by Jakobsen, the bent plywood chairs. And this is directly referencing them in a very obvious way, but then turning them into these kind of strange, adorable, squishy, physical, male, non-female things that are just cute. Effectively. So it's a very, very long explanation, but the idea is sort of boiling down lots of those ideas into something really, really clear and really, really simple.
I wonder if, feel free to disagree, I wonder if also the focus on objects being cute, also if it's something that can be quite thought-provoking, cute sort of sneaks things into the mainstream and then opens them up to be thought-provoking. Is that sort of also a way of making something more acceptable to the mainstream whilst also making people think? Is that anything that you were thinking about, or maybe not quite on your theme?
I mean, I don't do work that questions things directly. So it's not conceptual in that way that people read something and will sort of think, I think I try to create work that through its presence is accessible to the inquiring mind, and that there is more beyond or within what is present. My work tends to be enjoyed by the sort of general public,
Yeah.
and tends to be, it tends to, and this is not intentional, it just happens, but it tends to rile certain people within the design community.
Right.
And I think it definitely makes them think.
Well, that's good.
And actually it has led to interesting conversations where people are very dismissive or enraged by work that I've done.
Really?
But yeah, no, it's just
What
that they don't
about?
necessarily like it. They don't really like it. But then it's actually, on some occasions, it's been really nice because that has actually led to some conversations
Yeah.
which have been very productive and really
Mhm.
nice. Where I guess that inquiry door is
Mhm.
opened,
Yeah.
and maybe these other issues start to come out, and they
Yeah.
open up to them, which has been very, very lovely when it's
Yeah.
happened.
Right. Yeah. Well, brilliant.
But the work is just meant to effectively be there and be silent. Like I don't
Okay.
create pieces that are intended to be didactic.
Right.
They're sort of like onion like. It's an onion on the outside, and you can, there's more
Right.
beyond, but it's not
Yeah.
necessary to understand it. Which
Okay.
is why I get commissions effectively of, I get clients who just see my work, they're like, oh, it's happy, we want something happy,
Right.
and that's
Okay.
fine,
Different
but then
levels. Yeah.
yeah, and then I get other clients who approach me, and with a much more profound understanding, and that's great too, and I'm frankly
Yeah.
very happy to operate on either level.
Yeah. I guess it's good to have different levels in that way. Wider range of clients. But
Yeah, it's a good business
yeah,
strategy.
it is. So I know you mentioned that Human Form inspired the Fab Chairs. Would you say that Human Form has inspired other areas of your work or other projects that you've worked on?
Yeah, I collaborated with Sibling Architecture earlier this year on an installation for the NGV Triennial in Melbourne, which was a big sort of 400 square meter sort of takeover of their cafe ticketing space. And there it was, big three-dimensional installations, screens, artworks, and there it was very much, I mean, it was quite explicit. The whole thing aesthetically was meant to be one big gender fuck.
Right.
And so the colors, the graphical ornamentation, and the shapes of the form were all explicitly working together to create that sort of ambiguous gender blend environment, and of course it was all referencing sort of the body elements,
Yeah.
but none ever clearly referencing one part. It's always sort of ambiguous.
Yeah.
And kawaii and cute. And like you say, the cute is a fantastic way of slipping things in that you would never otherwise be able to slip in. Which I really do enjoy. It kind of shows that there's no topic really which is off the table. It's just depending on how you present it.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I guess. Why do you think it's important to celebrate Human Form and perhaps all its different shapes and sizes? What's your thinking behind that?
So I mean, I don't explicitly do that, but it is something that is in my head, and I do like to do, and it's also partially why I want to desexualize or not sexualize anything that I do. And people misunderstand sometimes. I think a couple of times I've given a talk, I've got comments in the kind of questions bar where people are sort of saying, your work is queer, what does sex have to do with anything? Sort of like, actually really not what I mean, because I think the sort of hypersexualized environment of gay culture that I grew up in was very detrimental to inclusivity. And was very detrimental to me and my mental health and many other people's. It was kind of like a hyper extreme version of the sexualization of women that was going on at the time, but like much worse. And so that's something that I very, very strongly reject. And then in terms of bodies, I think partially it's a combination of that and then experience of wider culture and how it just shames everybody. I mean, obviously it shames certain people so much worse, but it just shames everyone because no one can live up to an archetype. And the movement, over the past 30 years, 40 years towards a broader understanding of just being human and it all being really beautiful beautiful
Yeah.
has been one of the most beautiful things to see. And that, as somebody who has always struggled with body image my whole life, I feel very uncomfortable in myself still, despite having grown up in a world that is opening up to these things. I don't like being touched. Definitely, it takes a lot for me to get my shirt off. I love so much seeing people who are able to be proud. And I don't envy them, but I just find it so uplifting and so empowering. And in some small way, I do want the human body to be something that is just loved, really. No matter whether or not it fits a particular pigeonhole of gender, or a pigeonhole of beauty, or a pigeonhole of strength, or just whatever the hell it is. Whether it's really, really skinny, whether it's really tall, whether it's like small penis, big boobs, small, like whatever. All the angular jagged edges, the big squishy curves, like it's just all lovely because it's us and we only live once. So yeah, I mean, that's I guess something that really, so I'm just drawing some shapes actually now for a project. I'd like to draw sort of symbols, very simple shapes which sort of embody things, and I'm very much have that on my mind. So I guess it comes from a bit of a reaction to the environment growing up, as well as the kind of positive things that have been going on in the world around me, and wanting to embody that in some way in my work.
I know we've talked about different levels or layers of your work. You mentioned it, sort of comparing it to an onion. I mean, what in
Sorry, it's a bad comparison.
It's a great comparison. It makes complete sense. What would you say in a few words you want people to see or feel when they interact with your work?
So on the sort of main level, it's very simply a sense of aesthetic enjoyment. So the kind of main thing that I would like to do on the sort of highest, on the outer onion layer, is to take people outside, or provide the environment or the context for people to be able to step outside of themselves for a second or two. It's a bit Schopenhauer in that respect, his idea of art being something which takes you out of the kind of eternal exhaustion of existing in the world, and all those other things that we talk about that just wear everyone down, and just the grind of existing, and it providing a moment to just step outside of yourself. And it's a little bit like people say, oh, what do you think about minimalism? It's like, okay, I have no problem with minimalism, but actually for me, being put into a white room is the worst kind of torture, because my head is a absolute calamity of nuclear bombs going off in a washing machine constantly. I mean, it's just hell in my head. The worst thing to do would be put me in a white room. That's not calming, it's not meditative, it's just basically turning me inside my own hell. Whereas and this is very much reflected in a lot of traditional meditative techniques, where external ornamentation, external objects, very complex ornamental motifs are a way that help you step outside of your mind. They're actually quite calming. So that very much is the case for me. It's like in the city, having things to look at, in the hospital, having things to look at, in my home when I'm sort of nervous, having something to look at helps me. It's like going on a walk, right? The physical movement helps you calm down and helps you think. And for me, in a way, objects, ornamentation in the city or at home are kind of like the aesthetic version of going for a walk. Or sitting in a garden and looking at the trees. It sort of calms you down, sort of takes you outside of yourself and allows your mind to sort of be a little bit free. They're sort of meditative aids. So in my artwork, on a very, very upper level, just something which takes you outside of yourself for a moment and gives a little bit of pleasure through that. And ideally that it's also, they find it a little bit beautiful. And that's something that's why I try and do public art, as well as domestic objects, is because I find that those are the two moments that affect people the most in that sort of background way, so that I can be a part of people's everyday life at home, where somewhere in the day their eye will catch what I've made and it will just take them somewhere briefly else. And then in the city as well, sort of static background decorative ornament artistic decorative ornament, creates a kind of context where, if you so wish, if you're sitting down, if you're taking a break, it allows you to step out, provides a context, it provides a beautiful moment.
Yeah.
And I always loved those things growing up. So I'm kind of attuned to it. These objects at home calmed me. They helped me get through life. And similarly in the city, those things, you know, that's how I got into design and art, is through those sort of decorative art on the underground and on the civic buildings of the 1950s, Victorian buildings. So that's why I kind of moved towards those two scales, as it were. So it's very long-winded answer.
No, that's lovely. I can definitely see that looking around the projects at your website. I can definitely see how that. I'd love to go. Well, I plan to go and see some of them that I can are in London.
Well, there's a pyramid. Are you in London at the moment?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a pyramid in King's Cross.
Yeah, I will be
at the moment.
I will be there very soon. Just over the last few questions, I guess we touched on your use of color and how important that is in your sort of triad of influences and what you bring into your work. I mean, what's your influences there? I wondered whether there's a sort of a Memphis influence, or what would you say your influences are in terms of color and how important that is to your work?
I mean, there's a lot of influences. Memphis is one of them. It's just everyone knows Memphis, so they always reference Memphis. So color is something that I take very seriously. I run for the past 10 years, I've run a research group at the Architectural Association together with the artist Anthony Malinowski, called Saturated Space, and we've had 9 symposiums with lots of speakers. We've published numerous texts, one having just gone up recently on the website, and it's all within an academic context. So it's looking at color as a sort of very powerful active agent within urbanism and within architecture. I with my sort of texts and my involvement, it tends to look at it culturally. That's sort of my interest, and then Anthony looks at it phenomenologically. So, you know, in relation to body psychology and science, I'm much more influenced in sort of cultural questions around color. So it's something that, and we did that because people in architecture and design weren't necessarily talking about color in the way that we wanted to talk about it, taking it seriously beyond sort of trends and like, is it warm, is it cold? And that's been really successful, and that's something that we've had a long-term commitment to, and it's kind of, I guess, indicative of how seriously I take it, despite looking, you know, like a sort of ridiculous, bright, colorful cartoon sometimes. And so for me, it's the primary mode of expression. It's the way that you consensually and directly affect an observer, a viewer, or an occupant with your work through the senses. You know, together with sound, smell, touch. It's an instantaneous hit. It's the sort of main visual way of impacting people, and it's very, very, very powerful and potent, and strangely ignored recently, at least in the architecture world. And so, yeah, like from a very early age, color, but also ornamentation, and that for me, at least in my practice, the two are quite linked, were very much something that I experienced at home. My parents are foreigners from different places, and they kind of, especially on my sort of matrilineal side, my mother and my grandmothers, they sort of constructed an environment, a home, a culture, which was very aesthetically, which this is quite common with some immigrants. You know, you sort of create your safe space at home because I guess you no longer exist in the home country, which in any case my parents didn't really have, because they didn't quite belong there either, and you don't quite fully belong in the new country. So you sort of create a space which is yours, a sort of culture which is tied to that space, family culture, and they very much did that. And sort of color and what might be considered kitsch ornamentation was very, very integral to that. And also connects to sort of my family history in these sort of various countries and traditions. And then, you know, going through school, I was already being quite colorful. And, you know, being part of the gay scene in the late 90s, very colorful expressions of shared culture, pop culture, was really, really important, and it was very aesthetic, but it was really tied to very powerful and potent ideas of identity expression. And so I guess my artistic practice as a teenager during a child. I was always drawing. I was incredibly dyslexic and had problems learning at school, and so drawing was always a thing for me, and painting. And color was sort of the material of that in a way. And so I took that through as a teenager through these cultures, and had a load of fun because people who really liked my work and it fit in with their forms of expression. And then it came to architecture school, and I was just told, no, you're not allowed to do any of this. This is all ridiculous. This is all Memphis. And the reason I laugh you say Memphis is because Memphis was specifically the thing that was thrown at me to say why I couldn't use color.
Oh, okay.
So it's sort of being defined by the thing that actually was the thing that was used to push you down. I didn't even know who they were. You know, I was using color from, you know, the subcultures that I was from. I don't know, even neons from Cyberdog, from, you know, also, you know, discovering the National Gallery was a place that I would go to and cry in because it was open to the public. And as a teenager, when I had nowhere to go, I would go, sort of sad, lonely, artistic teenager, sit in front of, you know, Pontomo's, Bronzino's Allegory and sort of cry, you know, but just be washed over by those colors. And then going into architecture schools that are being told, no, this is postmodern rubbish. You're not allowed. And of course, it was much more than that. It was about expressions of identity. It was questions of, you know, mixing wider culture into the spatial expression of what I wanted to show. And so it became a real push throughout university to validate and explain why I should be able to use ornamentation and color. And then that continued through into my career. So color became very integrated with my notion of self-expression and identity, which was heightened and had to become, I guess, quite sharp in its expression by the reactions against it.
Right. Wow. Okay.
And that was, I mean, that was, you know, the need to have a sort of way of speaking and a sort of intellectual grounding was one of the reasons why I set up with Anthony the Saturated Space Research Group. It was basically to not feel so alone.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Well, I think that's all the questions, and that's been such an interesting chat with you and learning about your work and your views on pride, both P's, up capital and non.
Be proud and be full of pride. I mean, it's it's amazing how deep that message really is, and then how simple it sounds.
Yeah. Well, that's a great note to end on. So thank you so much for your time. We will obviously link to all your website and all your other pieces of work, so people can go and check it out. And yeah, that was great. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Gemma.
Cheers. Thank you, Adam.